Wow, thanks for that introduction. As you said, my manager got this great, he is a dreamer, and he had this dream that he wanted to make marine sciences available as a school subject in South Africa. And I sat back as a school teacher, or having come out of the school teaching environment, and I just thought there is too much involved in trying to do this. You don't stand a chance. But he is a go-getter, and he went and he got it, and the curriculum was written. And then we wrote an online resource which is available to all teachers in South Africa or in the world, for that matter, who want to teach marine sciences. And with last year's lockdown scenario and children no longer coming to the aquarium, we developed several online courses. And then my manager and my amazing CEO, Mareka, who you will be hearing from later in the year, decided that we should jump in and take it online. And we have just over 100 grade 10 students who are starting this 3-year walk with us. So that's going to be, it's kind of daunting at the moment, but also really exciting. And I'm looking forward to being able to share lots of marine science with these learners. Biomimicry was a topic that was introduced to me when a team visited the aquarium, actually to use it as a venue to do a presentation, actually a short course on biomimicry. And because we were at the aquarium, we were allowed to sit in and listen. And it just fascinated me to the point where I thought, I've got a lot to do, so I'm probably never going to become a scientist doing biomimicry. But I'm certainly so excited by it that I thought I have to plant the seed for people who are still heading into a professional career to understand that this is one of the green or blue revolutions, depending whether you're coming from the land or the ocean. And how does it tie into conservation? Because it's a green revolution, it is going to ensure that the way we utilize nature and the way we take resources out of nature in order to fuel our technology and solve technological problems is going to change in a radical way. I'm convinced of it. And I was so excited that the presenter who heads Biomimicry South Africa just said, you know, you're so enthusiastic, you've got to try and get out there and do these lectures. So here I am. Some of your questions might be beyond my understanding of biomimicry, but I think for most of you, it might be a first-time concept. And I think it's just going to be, I hope it's going to be a real experience. So in the screen at the moment, you've got the Shinkansen bullet train over here and a kingfisher. And I don't think it takes a broad jump of the imagination to see that there is a relationship between those two photographs. The story goes that the Shinkansen bullet train, which I'm told gets up to near 300 kilometers an hour as it whizzes through the countryside and into the major cities, as it goes through subways and tunnels and comes out the other side, they don't call it a bullet train for nothing. It sounds like a rifle shot. And obviously for the very densely packed populations there, that can be quite disturbing. And so the engineers were given the task to try and silence the Shinkansen bullet train. And one of the engineers was a birder. And he'd been watching the kingfishers hovering over the riverbanks and diving in and coming up with little fish in their mouths. And he thought, you know, those fish must be at least a few centimeters under the surface. So how on earth is it possible that they can hit the water and the fish doesn't feel that impact and move away before the beak gets to it? And he realized that that beak enabled them to enter the water so soundlessly and without creating any shock waves that the fish was caught completely off guard. And then he thought, well, if they can enter the water with the shape of beak like that, let's copy that and put it on the nose of the train. And lots of glass fiber work and fabrication took place, and the Shinkansen bullet train became almost entirely silent. I need to move this thing out of the way for the moment. And it was, I don't know if they wanted it to go faster, because 300 kilometers an hour is quite enough, thank you very much, but it could go 10% faster. And a lovely bonus was that it was 15% more efficient. So lots of added bonuses to getting this train to silence itself. And that kind of introduces what biomimicry is partly about. It's about biologists looking to nature to solve technological problems. Let me just move on. And coming out of a high school biology background and being a huge fan of Sir David Attenborough and his amazing documentaries, and growing up in university with this concept of structure and function are so interlinked. Pretty much nothing in nature is like it is without it having some sort of function. And this is where the biomimicry forum came in, because the people started to realize there is probably no technological or problem in technology that we can think of that hasn't in some way found a solution or had a solution adapted towards in nature already. So nature is the R&D, the research and development department for most of our technological issues. So here's an example. We've got a scorpion, and I would have taught about scorpions in high school. And in this case, there are very thin pincers for holding on to the prey, but clearly not for very long. So if the prey is fairly large and the scorpion can't deal with it quickly, it's not going to get its food. But on the other side, we've got a very powerful tail and a strong venom. And so the two tie together in order for this little guy to feel what's going on in front of him, grab on briefly just to sort of hold it in place and zap it with a very strong venom. And that's a classic example of natural selection. Nature is driven by natural selection, survival of the fittest. And different mutations and variations come about. And if they work better in a changing environment, then they are going to become part of the genetic makeup of that particular species, and those genes will be passed to their offspring. And so slowly but surely, a changing world, and without us being involved, it changes anyway. I think it's changing very quickly now because of us, and nature's struggling to keep up. But left to its own in a changing environment or moving into a new feeding niche, natural selection will solve problems. And in that way, as I said, most of the R&D has been done already. And so an entirely new branch of technology has come into play, which I'll refer to in a moment. I've just got a couple of examples. Spider webs, we're told, are 5 times stronger than their equivalent weight in steel. And that's basically a bunch of proteins that are being sprayed out of the spinnerets of the spider, which then solidify as they make contact with each other. If you look at the structure of a bone, you will realize that there truly is absolute economy there. There's no more material being used than is required to make that bone as strong as what it needs to be. And if the situation of the animal changes, where it's experiencing more stresses and strains or carrying greater weights, then the bone will have more material added to it in order to be able to deal with that. And I do know that a lot of architects have been looking to the structure and design of bone structures in different animals in order to come up with clever ways of designing buildings that can carry the weight that they need to with as little material as possible. And then, of course, those of you who are birders, I've been fascinated by watching birds, particularly diving birds, that steep down onto their prey and can fold up their wings or change the shape of their wing in order to get to the speeds that they require. And as they're about to hit their victim, fan out those wings, and the wings don't burst into a puff of feathers and they end up smashing into the ground. They are so strong that they can take that tremendous force, and that definitely makes them at least as strong as carbon fiber, but much stronger than steel. And these are structures that are growing out of the I want to call them the arm bones, the wings of these birds. And they're made from chemicals that are being produced at standard temperature and pressure using only the food that these animals eat. And that's where biomimicry really comes into its own. It's a new design principle where there's a multidisciplinary collaboration. So you don't have your engineer sitting doing one design and your architect sitting doing another design. They sit around the table and they discuss what are the things that we need to solve, and they call in a biologist. That's very important. That's what biomimicry is actually all about, is if nature can solve our technological problems, we need to have those guys or girls sitting around the table and saying, I hear your problem, and there is actually an example in nature that has solved your problem. So now we've just got to work out a way to do it. In a way, though, this is biomimicry at its simplest, because humans have sat and watched birds flying and thought, I want to fly. But you look at the way in which they've gotten into the air, it's not this elegant, incredibly cost-effective and minimally energy sapping way of doing things. They build these massive metal and carbon fiber structures, and they burn huge amounts of fuel in order to be able to get into the air. So they didn't look at the concept of how the birds are doing their flying. They just said, I want to fly. And that's not really how biomimicry works. It's meant to be far more elegant, and particularly, now this is where the real principles of biomimicry come into play. And unfortunately, I don't have too many examples of those at the moment, just some exciting ideas of this is what's happening in nature. And I'm going to be moving into the aquarium and a marine field in a moment for my examples. But examples of what Baldrick in Blackadder used to call a cunning plan, and then trying to emulate that. But if we're doing it really well, we're going to use resources efficiently. So no more material than is absolutely required to get this to work. No more energy than what is absolutely necessary to make it work. Using life-friendly chemistry, that's probably the biggest principle. So it should be happening in water, because that's how nature does it. All of the chemistry is happening either in the ocean or inside the cells of the animal. So you've got a big bag of water and all the chemistry is happening there. And it's happening at standard temperature and pressure. And it's locally attuned, which means that it's not going to look for the rarest materials and use incredible amounts of energy to get those materials out of the earth. And I've got this foundry as my photograph, because the biomimicry group talk about what's the heat and beat. And if you've got to heat something up to huge temperatures and use massive tons of pressure in order to form the thing you're forming, you're not following anything that is at all locally attuned. The idea is to use chemicals that are freely available: carbon dioxide, oxygen, calcium carbonate in the ocean, sodium chloride. And that's how nature does it. It doesn't have to go and mine the stuff out of the ground. everything that an organism requires to build its body and to perform its metabolic processes is coming from its food and from, in my case, the ocean that it lives in. Plants, I think, do it best. They are drawing carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere around them. They are drawing some chemicals out of the ground, and they are using solar energy to recombine those chemicals to make food and to build their own structures that they need. And if we're really doing biomimicry, then we're going to be doing that kind of chemistry. Okay, so let's move into the aquarium. And this is biomimicry at its simplest level. I'm teaching a lesson to a group of grade 3s about anemones. And I'm an anemone up in the front of the classroom, and you can see all the hands in the air. They are copying the anemone as well. And then we go to slightly more complicated versions. So in the classrooms, we have baby sharks. And that's so that when we teach lessons about sharks, we can put these little guys in a basin of seawater on the table for long enough for these kids to see that sharks are also little. These guys are about 10 centimeters long. They come from mermaids' purses or shark eggs that come in with algae that's been collected for the displays. And then we carefully take those eggs and look after them in our tanks until the little babies hatch out. Isn't this a great photograph? There's the egg yolk. Here's this little embryonic baby. It's still got external gills coming out, and you can see its umbilical cord and the blood vessels that are drawing the food into its body. And when they hatch out, we've got them in the tanks. This here, to give you some scale, is a black mussel. So this little guy is not much longer than about 9 centimeters at the moment. And we use them to get these kids to realize that sharks are also special, and they can be kind of cute, and they probably want to cuddle them. And once they grow to a certain size, we will then release them back into the ocean. So they've been ambassadors for the first few months, maybe a year of their life, and then they go back to the ocean. So why am I telling you about these sharks? Because when we put the skin of a shark under a microscope, we see that its scales are incredibly small. We refer to them as placoid scales. And if we enlarge that a little bit more, you can start to see that there's a very definite structure to it. And a little bit more, in many cases, the little tips here are quite sharp. So if you stroke the skin of the shark in that direction, following my mouse, let me turn that into a laser pointer for the moment. So if we go in that direction, then it's going to feel relatively smooth. But if we try and stroke in the opposite direction, we're going to hook up with these little points of these literally tiny teeth, and it feels like sandpaper. And we call these denticles. And for a long time, they thought these denticles had to do with strengthening the skin of the shark and maybe some part of its hunting technique. Possibly it bumps its prey or something like that. And then engineers started to do studies in water flow, and they discovered that the skin is incredibly hydrodynamic. In other words, water flows across it, obviously in that direction as the shark is moving through the water incredibly efficiently. Now, anybody who's done a bit of marine engineering will know that you can polish the hull of a sail yacht or any other ocean-going vessel as smooth as you like. There's always friction, and that creates drag. And when they did studies on how water flows across the denticles of the shark skin, they realized that the raised areas and these little depressions on either side redirected the flow in such a way that it is incredibly hydrodynamic. It almost creates a boundary layer so that the water, it makes contact with the skin, but not in a way where there's huge amounts of friction or drag. And so a shark will be able to move through the water far more efficiently than a similar shaped and sized animal that's got a completely smooth skin. Now, bony fish do this in a different way. They've obviously got flat scales, but the scales are covered in a slime, and the slime forms a similar boundary layer to prevent large amounts of friction. And so, how does this tie into biomimicry? The swimsuit company Speedo latched onto this idea of a very hydrodynamic surface, and using non-textile polyurethane came up with a full bodysuit that had denticle-like structures on it. And they made this available to Olympic swimmers, and it enabled them to swim ever so slightly faster than they used to. And when you are in an Olympic race, even a few split seconds is going to very possibly get you to win the race. And so in 2000, when they introduced it, there were 13 to 15 records that could be attributed to this Speedo fast skin suit. 2004, lots of swimmers using it and many records broken. 2009, 43 records could be attributed to Speedo fast skin. And at that point, they said, whoa, we can't use this. It's kind of cheating. We're not getting our swimmers to go faster. They're simply using the technology to give them that little edge. And at that stage, they banned fast skin, and they also limited the amount of skin that the suits that the swimmers are wearing is allowed to cover. So they effectively stopped the advantages of using something like fast skin. Another company in Germany, IFAM, came up with a type of paint that they sprayed through a special template and then got to dry using UV rays and other technology. And under an electron microscope, this is what the paint dried as. So it looks almost like a very sharp corrugated iron roof. And this had a similar effect to what shark denticles do. It is essentially copying the concept. And when they applied that to ships' hulls, they found that the drag was about was less, and that the ships are about 5 to 10% more efficient in their movement. Now, if you're going from the Middle East to South America, that equates to several tons of fuel that you are saving. And so it's well worth doing the application. They're also experimenting now with aircraft to see if they can make use of that on aircraft, and they're predicting that it will save huge amounts of jet fuel over the space of something like a year. But I don't know if it's being applied in any to any degree at this stage. Okay, so how can sharks save lives? These denticles go even further in how amazing they are. When bacteria form, they tend to create a film which then spreads. And we are now in a situation, because the only way we can deal with bacteria on the surfaces that we're trying to keep antiseptic in hospitals is to treat them with antibiotics. And then you're getting natural selection to happen, because the bacteria are they're not going to come up. There will be adaptations that enable some of them at some stage to survive the antibiotic, and then they simply breed faster and they pass that gene on to all of the other bacteria. And after a while, because you're trying to kill them, natural selection is selecting for some or other way to prevent them from dying. And so they will continue to evolve in order to evade any new antibiotic that we come up with. So it becomes like an arms race. And unfortunately, we now have superbacteria in hospitals like Staphylococcus aureus, which is so difficult to get rid of that in the UK, I think they've actually started to demolish the older hospitals because they cannot get rid of these bacteria. So what's the way to deal with this? If we want to stop biofilms from forming, we have to get them to not want to grow on those surfaces. There are certain algae, seaweeds, that produce a slime that bacteria just don't like. And for that reason, they don't go there. And because they don't go there, they're not going to evolve a way of dealing with that. They just go somewhere else. And you're not killing them, you're just making them so unwelcome that they don't want to grow there. And they found that parasites struggle to adhere to shark skin. So they thought, well, what if we make a microscopic form of shark skin so that bacteria won't want to form on it or will form much slower. And a company called Tactivex came up with a film. It's a plastic adhesive film that you can apply to surfaces that are frequently touched. And although it doesn't prevent bacteria from adhering to it, they will grow and adhere far more slowly. And so you can use it on surfaces where you are trying to keep antiseptic surfaces. And many of the plastic materials that they now use for drips and various other bags and plastics that they're using in the medical industry, they line it with this Tactivex surface. And in that way, they slow down or even prevent the growth of bacteria. I am supplying some URLs here so you can follow these links and firstly see where I've got the pictures from, but then also read more about these amazing things. So here's an interesting environment. It's near a seal colony just around the corner from where I stay. And that particular rock over there is acting as a very effective breakwater for the seal colony over here. But you would have seen at the beginning that it's quite dark around the edges. That's because we have growing over there black mussels. How on earth do they manage to grow in an environment where they're going to be exposed to that kind of wave force? And believe me, the force is capable of rolling massive boulders around. There's several ways. Firstly, they clump close together, so they're busy sheltering each other. Secondly, they have a reasonably hydrodynamic form or shape, and they're also attached by means of tiny little threads. Now, these threads start off as a tiny little blob of protein that is spun out and becomes a long thread and then kind of squashes itself onto the surface they want to attach to. So here's a black mussel that was in one of the tanks, and you can see that it has now created these little anchoring threads. And as I said, they start off as a little protein mucus thread, which then adheres onto the glass and then it solidifies. So they're creating a protein glue that can form itself into a thread and adhere really firmly underwater. And that's fantastic. We call them Bissel threads. Here's a microscope view, and you can see this little thread and the tiny little pad where it's squashed onto whatever surface it needs to attach to. And they can release those threads and move along and then reattach themselves again. So they're not anchored for life. They can actually move around. Just to give you that name again, they're called Bissel threads. And so some biomimicry practitioners got to thinking, wouldn't it be great if, firstly, we could create glues that solidify underwater, but secondly, get away from these nasty carcinogenic chemicals and create a glue that has a benign protein base instead of the nasty formaldehydes and things. Now, I'm pretty sure when you've possibly had a new cupboard installed or moved into a new house and they've got chipboard or plywood, most of it nowadays is not solid wood, it's all a composite of some sort. And you open those cupboards, and for a year or two, you can smell the chemicals in there. Who would want to put food in a cupboard like that? But we kind of take it for granted, and we just put our stuff in there. And it's probably having an adverse effect on us. And the Colombians, or this particular company, Colombia's Pure Bond, learned about these Bissel threads and thought, wouldn't it be fantastic if we could make at least a glue that is protein-based? And they've managed to come up with a soy-based glue. And so all of their hardwood plywood is constructed with this benign, earth-friendly, soy-based protein. You've got a URL you can look at there. So in many cases, biomimicry is not only about looking at structure, but also looking at chemical processes and how we can copy them. Here's another fascinating fellow. We were doing a rock pool study, although we did have one of these in the aquarium. It's called a rock sucker, and they normally go underneath little crevices in the rock. Sometimes in rock pools where they're exposed at low tide, they're actually out of the water, but their pectoral fins, the ones that sit up towards the front, form into what looks like a little sucker. The American equivalent is called a clingfish. And they've discovered that these guys can cling onto dry surfaces or wet surfaces, smooth or rough. So there's something very special about that sucker. And they did a little bit more research, and then they came up with a clingfish, literally a clingfish sucker. They mimicked a surface that was very similar to the clingfish sucker. When they put it under a very strong microscope, they saw that the undersurface of the sucker had almost little hexagonal pads. So it wasn't a entire surface. It was broken up into lots of little suckers. And they had microscopic little hairs on them. And they tried to copy the little hairs, but it didn't seem to work very well. And then they established that if they just made the sucker out of a very soft substance, and silicon works perfectly for their purposes, and put lots of little slits in the sucker, then it behaved like the clingfish sucker. And so they had a sucker that could hold onto surfaces that weren't entirely smooth. They could hold onto them underwater. They could hold onto them on dry land. They could hold onto soft surfaces like fruit skins, or onto hard surfaces that were rough like sandpaper. And so with these carefully arranged slits and very soft silicon, they came up with a sucker that could adhere to just about anything in or out of water and carry up to 350 times the mass of the sucker itself. And now they're looking at technology where they're putting this onto the grabbers of ROVs that they send down into the ocean. And it's starting to be used tremendously as a way of handling and sorting fruit in factories. Lots of other amazing uses from the clingfish sucker. And then some of our aquarium lobsters, lovely beady black eyes. And if we focus close up on the eye of the lobster, now this is a lobster molt. So the lobster has gotten too big for its exoskeleton, and it literally removes itself from the exoskeleton and forms a slightly larger, soft exoskeleton, which then hardens that they can grow into. And even the lens of the eye is part of the exoskeleton. And when we focus really closely on that lens, we see that it is made up of tiny square facets. So not like an insect eye, which traditionally has a hexagonal facet, but square ones. And a little bit of research into that indicated that they were basically tapering boxes going from the surface that the light was entering and then internally reflecting down to the actual retina of the eye. And one clever technologist, engineer, got wind of this and thought, trying to mimic an insect eye is difficult because you're working with hexagons, but to come up with polished steel surfaces or sheets and bend them into tapering boxes is quite easy. And he developed the radiant optics IR lens heater focuser. So if you put a heater on this side, let me just get my laser pointer. So if we put a heater on this side, and we've got all of these folded shiny sheet metal boxes that taper slightly, then we're going to radiate the heat out to a larger surface. More importantly, if we can put our heater on this side, we can focus the heat onto one point. And so he developed heaters with this IR lens technology for large warehouses where people would go and shop, and you'd have a whole row of checkout points, almost like a macro or a hypermarket or a hyperama. And normally the people who are visiting in the middle of winter are tightly bundled up, and they don't mind walking around a reasonably cold warehouse in order to get their goods and go to the checkout to pay. But you've got to look after your employees who are at the checkout. And so a brilliant way of keeping your checkout employees warm while the rest of the warehouse doesn't have to be heated up is by putting IR lens heaters over the till points. And so you're using a small amount of energy to keep your employees who have to sit there for hours on end warm, while the rest of the warehouse can be kept only moderately warm. So here's a great way of saving money and economizing on our energy by focusing it only onto the places that are required. And we're doing it by mimicking the lenses of the eyes of crustaceans like rock lobsters. Abalone, they are the kings of composite technology. When you pick up an abalone shell, it's fairly brittle, but while it's alive, it's a combination of calcium carbonate crystals that are laid at different angles, almost like plywood, and they're interlaced with protein. So if there's a huge impact on the shell of the abalone, possibly a rock that gets rolled against it and it cracks, it can fill that gap. And that gave the inspiration for self-healing concrete. Go and look it up. It actually exists. You can produce self-healing concrete. And at the same time, it's a great example of how you can create very strong composites that are almost stronger than ceramic, but also can heal themselves. And it's being done in seawater at whatever temperature the body temperature of the animal is. And they're using calcium carbonate that they're extracting from the seawater and their food to produce proteins and calcium carbonate crystals. Imagine if we could take that membrane that lines the inside of the abalone shell and engineer it in a laboratory so that we can dip it into seawater in whatever shape we want, and we can grow a composite structure instead of making a plastic one. So instead of a cell phone cover or all of the plastic bits on your laptop that are made out of plastic, we can create the membranes in the correct shapes we need, put them in salt water for a couple of hours, and draw out our abalone shell structure, which is going to take over from plastic possibly. Okay, there's a lot of work to be done on that membrane technology still, but it is theoretically possible. Again, we're looking at the chemistry that this animal is capable of and trying to find ways of mimicking it so that we can stop producing plastic products and start producing earth-friendly products. We just have to have the financial incentive. And then our cephalopod teachers, fascinating animals. We could spend hours just talking about the multiple rows of suckers that it has on its arms. We could talk about the amount of nerve endings that these suckers have and about how intelligent they are. But for now, what I want to look at is their amazing ability to blend in with their environment. And here's the fellow. I only noticed him because he just moved ever so slightly as I walked past the rock pool.
Here's some algae in the foreground and an octopus. Isn't that amazing? Let's do it backwards. I thought he was joking when he first showed it to me. I thought it was all graphics. So here it is in reverse. Watch the skin color. Watch the skin texture. Just an amazing animal. Can change color and texture to match the surroundings. Watch him blend right into this algae. 1, 2, 3.
So the octopus has a skin where it can not only change the color of the skin, but also how reflective the skin is. And there are muscles within the skin that can change the actual shape of the skin to the point where it absolutely mimics this algae that it's sitting on. I think the scuba diver got close enough for it to get worried, which is why it then disappeared and went a bright white color, which meant I am angry with you, and then shot out this little cloud of ink to try and put off the predator following it. The applications of that ability, I'm afraid, often go towards the military side of things, but I'm sure that there are many industries where the ability to not be visible or to hide away can be tremendously useful. I'm just so sorry that my very own octopus footage wasn't working for us. In the aquarium, we have cowfishers or boxfishers. And believe it or not, they were the inspiration for the Mercedes Bionic. It was a concept car that never actually saw the open road, but it was based on this peculiar shape here. Now, although the boxfish is not particularly fast, it is incredibly efficient in being able to move through the water, slow as it is, and incredibly maneuverable. And they were trying to design a vehicle that had a very, very, very low aerodynamic drag factor, but also a large box-like shape in which they could pack all their people. And the boxfish was the inspiration for the Mercedes Bionic. Sadly, I don't think the buyers were particularly keen on how it looked. And so, although it was a great concept and incredibly fuel efficient, it didn't sell. A lovely photograph taken by one of our big supporters at the Two Oceans Aquarium, Steve Benjamin. This is a humpback whale breaching in Table Bay. And if you look carefully, you'll see that the edges of these main flippers are kind of all bumpy. We call those little bumps tubercles. And for a long time, it was just accepted that that's how it is. And most people were thinking, what an inefficient design. But when, again, the engineers started to look at this, and a lot of biomimicry works like this, it's kind of saying, why on earth have teeth on your skin for denticles or these funny bumps on the fins? And when they did the water flow test, they realized that the tubercles, funny as they are, get the water to flow across far more efficiently than if it was a completely straight, smooth surface. And that led to a company called Whale Power Incorporated looking at different ways in which they could use tubercles. Now, putting them on a wing of a plane, great idea. It does actually work, but with the aerospace industry, what it is, getting it to be accepted will take forever. But they've got different kinds of fan blades using tubercles that need less energy to be turned, or if you put them onto a wind generator blade, can spin faster for less amount of air. So if you're trying to spin the fan, you're using less energy. And if you're trying to generate power, you need less wind to get the blades moving. And another company, I'm a keen cyclist, and 2 years ago, I saw the company called Zip advertising new carbon fiber wheels that had tubercles on the inner surface. And they are, in fact, more efficient at gliding through the air. I'm not sure if the average cyclist is going to get anything out of it, but it's possible that your Tour de France greats will be able to get that, just that little edge that they need to go faster. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, not only mimicking structures, but also processes, in a challenge to come up with, with some innovative ideas. Some kids put together a project for the Metropolitan magazine, Metropolis magazine, where they said, wouldn't it be amazing if we could take the bioluminescent chemicals from animals that can glow in the dark and combine it with a protein surface and coat surfaces of buildings and pavements with it, so that you don't need lighting at night. You've got glow in the dark pavements and buildings. Great concept, but it's still in the concept phase. They're struggling to get a surface that can actually stay glowing for more than a couple of days at a time, because it is a living structure. But I have no doubt that we're going to get there. And I'm afraid I don't have examples. I did contact Biomimicry South Africa to ask them if they could give me one, but now the biomimicry practitioners are looking at whole systems. How do you get traffic to flow efficiently in a built-up environment? Look at all of the traffic here on this reef. I can tell you now they don't have traffic jams. When you watch how ants move in order to go and collect food, they might be on a little freeway system all following each other, but they don't have traffic jams. Running a farm should work in the same way that trees and plants grow in nature, so that you're recycling all of your energy in such a way that you can produce what you need, but recycle the rest, so that you don't end up with waste areas and sewage water and other things that humans are trying to throw away. There is no way. A way should be back into the system. And I did provide you with some further reading. I took notes from next week's presenter. So if you are interested, you can go to this website, asknature.org, which I think is USA based. And it's amazing. You can type in, I would like to work out how to do the following. So how do I create a surface that sticks on glass? Then they'll give you examples, or you can Google the animal and say, are there any biomimicry applications for the termite? There's some amazing ones, by the way. So do try that one. And then we've got our very own South African. In fact, there are several South Africans who are at the forefront of biomimicry. So we've got Biomimicry South Africa, and you can have a look at their website, or you could contact them if you want more information. How does this tie into environmental education? When I got to the aquarium, I started to read up on environmental education, and I saw a word called ecophobia. And it was being made very clear that if we go into a classroom and we simply say, we have ruined it, your parents and your grandparents have turned the world into a place that is not going to be worth living in, then the kids get ecophobia and they simply withdraw, and they don't want to go outside, and they don't want to engage with nature. So we need to keep our children active in nature and going outdoors and experimenting and eager to be able to make a difference. And how do we do that? By showing them these kinds of technologies and telling them, you know what, we have messed up really badly, but there is hope in the future. And you've just got to keep on looking for ways of making the world a better place. And I love this saying, so I thought it would be a fitting sunset for this particular talk. If humans are the problem, then undoubtedly they're also the solution. And we have messed up, but we've also found amazing ways to improve and make better. And that is the message I leave you with. Biomimicry is one of the technologies that is going to undoubtedly become really, really important in the future. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're on to question time.
Xavier, what a fascinating talk.
Thank you.
There's two sides of the talk, and the one was the last bit of the talk when you spoke about ecophobia. We pick it up all the time, the ecophobia amongst youth, and here you have just come up in a little sentence and just brought a different perspective, which is as fascinating as your talk is fascinating. You know what, I always check the numbers, and I can say to you, nobody dropped out of your talk. People right at the end, which says it all. People were glued to the screen, and I thank you for this incredible, incredible insight. Ladies and gentlemen, if Mariette will unmute all of you, we're going to give Xavier a round of applause, and then time for questions and answers. Mariette, if you can please unmute everybody, then a round of applause.
Thank you.
Xavier, thank you so much. Hello, everybody back onto mute. Unmute myself, Ruan, unmute, and let's get the questions and answers going. You can either just raise your hand and we will unmute you, or you can raise your hand electronically if you go into I think in the participants button at the bottom, and then you can raise your hand. Any questions or comments?
May I make a comment, Chris?
Of course.
Xavier, thank you very much. It was fascinating, and it's always good to be reminded of the things that you once learned in university. I could not help but be reminded of a slogan of a very famous vehicle brand, Vorsprung durch Technik. I think we all know where that is, but I think we can change that to not advancement through technology, but Vorsprung durch Natur, advancement through nature. And I think it's a wonderful, marvelous pursuit, and important to remember what you said earlier on in the talk, a life-friendly pursuit to the survival, not only of our species, but of all other species and life on Earth. Well, thank you for a brilliant talk. It was absolutely amazing.
Thank you, Ruan.
Thank you, Ruan. Marty, did I see your hand? No? Okay, it was up, but maybe you just scratched that new hairdo of yours. Let's check. Any questions? Yep, Andy, we unmute you.
Andy's got one.
Yes, Andy has one.
Hi, Xavier, thank you ever so much. That was amazing. A new world for me, really. Just a quick one. A lot of new technologies and solutions to problems we have are often stymied, bought up, and rebutted against by existing technologies they seek to replace. You know, you get big industry buying up or trying to shut down the innovations. Have you had any experience of that? Thank you.
Some of the reading that I did around it, because I got to a point where I thought I need to know some more detail as to who the practitioners are and how are they coping. They very often go into crowdfunding or self-funding and basically bring out their own product and get it going, and then sell it to somebody else to carry on going with. So they actively avoid getting bought out or squashed by big corporations by essentially finding a way to go it alone until the product is sufficiently recognized to be able to go into the mainstream. But yes, that would be an issue. certainly something like the Abalone shell technology. You've got your oil giants and your plastic giants who are going to very possibly try and squash anything that produces products in a way that plastic is not being used. And I think also some of that chemistry is still in its infancy. So it does require somebody to say, I like this idea, I'm going to pay you to do the research to get this going.
Thank you, Xavier. Andy seems happy with your response.
Okay.
Thank you for that. I'm checking for any other questions.
I can't see any.
I don't see any. There's
Akimi's got one.
Yes.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you very much for a most interesting talk. I'd like to know, does China play a big role? You say South Africa is very active, but does China play a big role in biomimicry?
I don't know. I think there is so much scientific research and innovation being done in China that I'm almost certain that there are academics there that are doing biomimicry. But I can't say for sure. I don't know. That will probably just require 1 or 2 Googles and you'll get your answer.
Thanks.
Martin?
Cool. I just wanted to say thanks very much for the talk. It was very interesting. I've actually had the privilege of listening to Claire Janish do a few talks from Biomimicry ESA, and also Jay Harmon, who's quite a famous biomimicry guy from Australia. And I mean, his whole Lily fan shape. And in a way, the things are completely counterintuitive. But the one thing that I remember them saying, which is sort of stuck with me, is if you look in nature, there's never straight lines. There's never a direct straight from here to there, or it's not angular shapes, whatever. It's actually all curves. And I mean, if you think of your large intestine and all those things, so it's just actually almost completely counterintuitive to the way that you would expect. The shortest distance is between 2 points, but the most efficient flow and all of that from hydraulics and so it's always just amazing. And thanks again for the inspirational talk.
Thank you, Marty. Yes, Jay has written a lovely book that I think it's called A Shark's Tale or something like that, which is where I got the information that I think in his case, he realized if he wanted to get his biomimetic designs into the mainstream, he basically funded it himself and got it going and came up with some fantastic designs. And yes, Claire Janish is the sort of mother of biomimicry in South Africa, and she's done amazing work. And it was her who actually inspired me with that first lecture and got me thinking, well, I don't think I'll be a practitioner, but I've got to sow the seeds because it's such a brilliant concept. Janssen? We need to unmute.
Thank you, Xavier. Firstly, wonderful talk. Thank you very much. Fascinating, totally.
Thank you.
Just adding on to Marty's very interesting question. If nature teaches us to be non-linear, i.e. no straight lines, angles, and so on, what would your hypothesis be as to why we as humans evolved an education system, a structured way of thinking that is almost only linear? So it's fascinating that it's, when you said it was counterintuitive, truth of the matter is, being nonlinear is actually natural, and we are counterintuitive in our way of thinking with straight lines and angles and so on. So I would be fascinated in your interpretation of the evolution of thought as to how we landed up where we've landed up in our teaching system, in our design system, and in our usefulness system, and in our appreciation of aesthetics. As opposed to the fractal things, we tend to like straight lines and order.
Dare I blame the mathematicians? No, I can't blame the mathematicians. I suspect that on a simple level, if you're trying to get from point A to point B, inevitably a straight line is probably the quickest way to do it. And it might have come out of travel and starting to draw straight lines on maps and things like that. As you said, what is my hypothesis? It's a hypothesis. I really can't say. But I don't think that takes into account the surfaces that are involved. And as soon as you start changing your surfaces, anybody who's done hiking in areas where there's lots of vegetation will tell you very quickly that the straight line is definitely not the quickest way to get from point A to point B. You have to take your obstacles into account, and you develop a flow that takes you around that. Yeah, but I do think that a lot of mathematics is, or certainly geometry, is based on straight lines or proper circles and things like that.
Thanks, Xavier. Anybody would like to make any hypothesis or raise any idea on this?
If not, Chris, I think Jonathan Leeming had a question. Yes.
Sorry, let's unmute again.
He was unmuted, but now he's not.
Not any.
Back.
How's that?
Yeah.
I think we have a very, very egocentrical view of the world. You know, for hundreds of years, we thought that mankind was the kind of the pinnacle of, let's say, evolution and all these other things. Yeah. And I think we are slowly beginning to realize that that's just not the case. There's so much that we can learn from the natural world. And my original question was, it's interesting that it's those creatures that are in our back gardens, those common things that we overlook, that are providing us with those, with all those answers to these difficult questions. And I think it would be inspirational. You know, we teach children inside classrooms, but how about going for a walk, exploring some kind of natural area, exploring the seashore, and not just talking about ecosystem services, which is very largely disconnected, you know, from a lot of people's lives. But talking about these inspirational stories that inspire and really kind of spark the imagination of the next generation. And I think that's exactly what biotechnology is all about. There is hope out there. There's all these answers to our problems just waiting to be found. And they're being found in the most unusual places, because we just don't think these animals, you know, really offer mankind any kind of value. That's all I have to say.
You've got me all excited, and I could go on for hours with other examples, but I will hold back. Just to say that I agree fully. Some of my best lessons have been unprepared lessons where I've gone for a walk with a group of kids and nature has provided me with the things to talk about. It is a very important experience, and it's very necessary.
Wonderful. Thank you, Xavier. Anybody else?
Oh, I can't see any. If I may add to that, to Jonathan's train of thought and to Xavier's, I think the aquarium, the Two Oceans Aquarium as an institution, does that beautifully and seamlessly. They have various opportunities for kids. They have a little bus that they send out to, well, everywhere, all across the peninsula, where they take nature to the kids to show them what it's like, to have them feel, to have them touch, to make them understand that it's not only pictures on a computer screen or in a book, it's living organisms. So yeah, well done to that, Xavier, and the and your team at the aquarium. You are doing brilliant work.
Thank you.
And if I may, Chris, maybe Xavier can tell us a little bit quickly, maybe a little bit more about the aquarium's education foundation, and that the online courses are not only for kids, but it's open to the broader public, if I understand correctly.
Yes, absolutely. Well, obviously our bread and butter used to be getting school groups to the aquarium so that we could give them an experience in the classroom as well as in the actual aquarium. That all changed with lockdown, and in addition to taking marine sciences online, we intended to do that, but not so quickly. So it's been a huge learning curve. But then we've also taken the marine sciences curriculum and developed a 5-week, 10-session marine biobasics course, which is pretty much all the marine biology out of that curriculum, going from protozoans right to mammals, and a shoreline footprints South African coastal ecology course, which unpacks sandy beaches, rocky shores, kelp forests, estuaries, and open ocean. Oh, we do put in coral reefs, although we've only got tiny sections up in the KZN coastline. And yeah, both of those are 5-week, 10-session courses for high school kids and adults. And we've had a good following and good feedback on that. And then obviously the courses that we always run for the littlies at the aquarium, we now run as online courses